The so-called samurai killer Morné Harmse from Krugersdorp has been released on parole. Harmse, who was convicted of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder, was sentenced to an effective 20 years behind bars in 2009. That's after killing 16-year-old Jaques Pretorious. 3 other people were injured in the incident. Let's get some reaction on this news now. We're joined by Leonie Pretorius, the aunt to Jaques Pretorius, and Dr. Gérard Labuschagne, a clinical psychologist. A big thank you to both our guests for joining us. But let's bring into the conversation Dr. Gérard Labuschagne. He's a clinical psychologist, and he joins us in studio now. Thank you very much for joining us. I would have loved to ask Mr. Pretorius about their engagement when it came to the parole process and what this young man's demeanor was, especially in terms of rehabilitation and freedom in South Africa. What do you understand, at least?
You know, one of the biggest frustrations I've found with these parole hearings is they're not what people expect. Often families don't even know they've taken place, so you don't have the input from the family. You don't have experts, private experts or external experts who are able to contribute to these and give a different opinion. And even on the panel themselves, there are no psychologists or psychiatrists or social workers. They receive reports from other psychologists, but the panel then decides what to do with those. So I often find, and I had this time and time again where psychologists from correctional services would tell me that they get the most bizarre referrals back from these boards. I mean, it's as good as me telling a surgeon what he or she should be doing in his surgery. You know, a lay person giving those recommendations as to what must happen next with the individual. So I think there's a lot of dissatisfaction in how these things are constituted. They're not what people actually expect they're going to be. The Lee Matthews example earlier this year, I was present in that, and I compiled the report. The family lawyer compiled the report, and they said, sorry, but you cannot submit those. There's no mechanism for you to submit those. They only want to hear what the family has to ask the offender. So it's really geared in a way, and the parole boards really seem to think that if you feel remorseful and you've done some courses, you should be released. But, you know, the judge, the judge or magistrate gives a sentence, they say they have to balance up punishment, deterrence that you won't do it again, deterrence that other people won't think this is a good idea to try themselves, retribution, and, of course, the offender and the rehabilitation. They look at all those factors before they say a 20-year sentence, a life sentence. But the parole board just seems to look at how well behaved has this person been. And the fact that you even maybe are rehabilitated doesn't mean you've necessarily finished being punished. And we have a man here who tried to commit a mass murder. You know, as you said, he's convicted of 1 murder and 3 attempted murders, which means the court found his intention was to kill those people. We know in his dialogues prior to the incident, even the week before, he was trying to incite his fellow schoolmates to participate in a mass murder event. So this is no different to those kids in the United States who go to a high school and shoot a bunch of people. That's how we should be viewing Morné Harmse, and he has not done well. He has more risk factors than before he went to prison. And it's just I'm flabbergasted that the Correctional Services Board, the parole board, sorry, would release him. You know, the psychologists still were of the opinion he should not be released, he's a danger to society. But they seem to think, well, you're just one voice amongst, you know, the 2 of us, 2 members of the community, and whoever else sits on this panel, who, as I said, are lay people, and those opinions and voices outweigh whatever an expert says. I mean, then why do we have psychologists submitting reports if you're going to ignore them?
And this is just one incident that is at least, you know, in the public space. You refer to the Lee Matthews case as well. One wonders how many other families are going through this pain. We'd like to reintroduce into the conversation Ms. Leonie Pretorius. She's the aunt to Jaques Pretorius, a young man who was killed as a result of the samurai killer. Ms. Pretorius, no doubt a very difficult time for yourself and for your family. What does this news of him getting parole mean to you?
Well, we were quite shocked to get the news that he was coming out on parole. We attended the parole hearing in 2019 where he was denied parole at that stage. And on the 28th of February, I just got an email from the correctional services to say, you know, that he was granted parole and he will be out on the 3rd of March. And yeah, it was quite shocking news to us. It was quite shocking.
If you can, please just talk us through the parole hearing process. Was there a time where you had to come face to face with him? What was his demeanor like? Was he remorseful? Did he say anything to the family?
No, we went to the parole. We were invited to the parole hearing, and yeah, we you know, like sat in like a boardroom type of thing. So he was like 2 meters away from us. He never ever looked us in the eyes. He never ever said anything. The parole officer asked him, do you have something to say to the Pretorius family? And he just said that, he's got nothing to say to us. We would have expected at least, that he would have said at that stage, listen, I'm sorry, or anything, but yeah, it definitely doesn't show any remorse.
Let's focus on Jacques. Tell us about your nephew. What kind of a person he was, what future you perceive he would have had?
Well, Jacques was a normal 16-year-old boy, a busy boy, a naughty boy, like 16-year-olds has to be, I suppose. I don't think he actually, at the age of 16, thought about future at that stage as much, because he was still enjoying life as he's supposed to be at the age of 16. And yeah, he was a happy-go-lucky child with lots of potential because he was a very good cricket player and he was a very good rugby player.
Dr. Labuschagne, what options are then available for a family in a time like this? That's even if they have bandwidth for the process.
In terms of what can they do about the fact that he's been released? Probably very little. One can perhaps, like we saw, I think, with other high-profile people being released, you can perhaps try and take it on court, on a review in the court system to see do they follow proper procedures. But, of course, that costs money, which most of us don't have money for such a high court action. So there's very little you can do. I mean, the parole board has literally an absolute power. If they want to release someone, they will release someone. There's very little one can necessarily do about it. Like I said, accept a review. So that's unfortunate, the situation. And I quite frankly think that we should, and I'm not saying that's what happened in this case, we should make parole board decisions, the people who sat in that parole board, civilly and criminally liable for any type of similar offense that occurs in the remaining portion of the person's sentence. If they're that confident to release them back into society, then they should put their sort of situation on the line. And quite frankly, this is a situation that's massively open to the potential for corruption. Think about it. You have the ability to release someone halfway through their sentence. You're telling me that there's no chance in hell that anybody might try to influence that system, influence the people on the parole board. They should be having lifestyle audits. They should be having regular polygraphs like we expect from some of our policemen who are dealing with high-profile and sensitive matters, and prosecutors. They should be subjected to the same comb.
You mentioned earlier on that you see more risk factors developing after his incarceration than before. Ms. Pretorius, if you'll please allow me to maybe just give a bit of detail into the story for some of our viewers who are not familiar with it. This young man took a sword. He slit the throat of, Jacques, and some reports suggest that he almost severed his head. And so when you speak of more risk factors developing, I guess it talks to your point that what happens if this person is then a repeat offender?
Yeah, and obviously this is all aimed at the concerns that he might offend again. This is not, my comments and fears now are not just that he's been released and that's unfair and that's sad. This is more, but there's a realistic risk for him to do harm, not only to someone else, but to himself, and that's unfair. We know where we're setting up someone with these risk factors for failure. Who's going to take responsibility when that actually happens? It's not fair on him that he could get in a situation where he can do something to himself or other people, and we knew that, and the warning signs were there. It's really not even fair on him. That's why I say the parole board should start to be the ones being held accountable, civilly and criminally, when anything does happen, if something should happen.
Checking the system. Ms. Pretorius, just maybe a closing thought from you in terms of how the family, has been treated throughout this process, especially with the parole hearings. What would you like to submit to any of the authorities that, may be listening and taking something into consideration following this conversation that can be done better for other families as well?
Well, I would think they should definitely take the psychiatric report into consideration, and the family's view of how do they feel about it. Because my other concern is that this man is left free in Krugersdorp. Jaques' family stays in Krugersdorp. So I think they should have taken that into serious consideration. Because what happens if these two families bump into each other?
Thank you very much, ma'am, for joining us this afternoon. Leonie Pretorius is the aunt to Jaques Pretorious, and Dr. Gérard Labuschagne is a clinical psychologist. But, Doc, before I let you go, I think perhaps, just again, these are just some of the high-profile cases that we are aware of. There are some cases where families can't even afford this process, where perhaps they live too far to where the hearings are taking place, or they do not even have, the necessary technology that is required to participate in this process. The overall message that I hear coming from you is that there needs to be a systematic change here. Where does it start?
Well, like I said, we have to look at how, I think either whether it's people taking the parole boards to court or the correctional services, or there's some pressure from external sources. I think media pressure from family members like Ms. Pretorius we see, and the Matthews family have been very vocal about trying to create change, and women's organizations, because of course it's very often women that are the victims of these individuals' crimes in many cases. So I think there has to be pressure from various sides, and it has to be a revamp. You pointed out, what about a lady who's been living in an informal settlement for the past 15 years and her son was murdered 15 years ago? How does she keep informed correctional services? We have to have a system where people can, at least maybe with the assistance of others, log in online and make sure their details, that they can update their details and a contact number, or even type out a little saying of what they want to have said to be taken into consideration one day. So it has to be more accessible to the average person, where they can make sure that the information is updated with correctional services and they can be contacted. Because we have the Pretorius family was contacted, but what we mustn't forget, there were 3 other attempted murder victims. Were their families considered and asked, or the victims, because they survived, they could be asked directly, how do you feel about Morné being released back into society? So a system whereby the lowest person in our community in a socioeconomic circumstances can make sure that the information can be made available and contactable when these things happen. Because even the Matthews family that have been, for the past few years, in direct contact with correctional services, they tried to sneak it through with Donovan Woodley last year, and they've been in continual contact. So even there, people with resources and who have been on the correctional services case almost missed out actually being present at his parole hearing.
Thank you very much to both our guests. Leonie Pretorius is the aunt to Jaques Pretorius, and Dr. Gérard Labuschagne, a clinical psychologist. Thank you.